Today's topic is going to talk about Verse Pro's run at Epicenter. I think this is a legendary run, especially within the context of their last 6 to 7 months when they were complete trash, or the overarching context of their entire careers where they are one of the most legendary teams in any esport, the longest standing lineup in any game that I know of. And this is a team I've nicknamed basically the defenders of the gate, like the last guys you have to beat if you want to get an era. So they had NIP had to play them, Fnatic had to play them, Envious had to play them, SK had to play them, Astralis had to play them, FaZe now have to play them, and I guess SK again if SK do rise up to that point again. So basically they've done it. Virtus Pro has somehow risen out of the ashes of the single worst slump I have ever seen from them. It was such a terrible slump that I basically had to write them off. Basically, among all of their slumps, this is by far the worst. So the fact that they made it out of this hole is probably their biggest achievement, just in terms of getting back to the top. Just because the climb was so much higher this time, and I remember writing something basically that the person I thought could have potential to bring them back to the top was Snacks, now that Snacks was no longer in-game leading, and it was Taz. But as it turned out, Snacks was not the player to look out for. Snacks was actually, I'd say he was the worst player among the five for Virtus Pro. He did have some critical clutch rounds at critical moments, and he did have some good plays, but overall, I'd say the other four did better contribution throughout the entire tournament, particularly Neo and Taz. And that was a huge surprise because Neo and Taz have been terrible throughout the entire time Snacks has been in-game leading. They were basically just non-existent. That's the word I'd use, non-existent, as if they weren't really getting any kind of impact. Like the way I think about support players or star players, another way you can think about it is frontline and backline, and then Taz is like a frontline support player, Neo is a backline supportive type player. So basically, if Taz is going off well, then he can entry frag and break open sites, and he's kind of like the tempo setter for the T sides of Virtus Pro when he's doing fairly well. And then Neo is the guy who cleans up. He has the clutch rounds. He has great decision making. He seems to have really good reads on the game, and is right there at the right time on CT side or T side, depending on what position he's playing in. Like sometimes he's lurking from the T side. Sometimes he's playing in small man situations and has to make hard decisions on the T side. Or on the CT side, he's generally put in like a rotation position, or maybe he's given like a secondary op. He's basically given like a bunch of these types of support roles, and he's also a guy who like comes up with a bunch of the nades, as far as I know, or it seems likely. So basically, during this run, they beat 3 teams and then lost to SK in a narrow fashion. The 3 teams were Gambit, FaZe, and G2, and I'm not going to go through the entire run. I'll just hit on some points. But basically, if you look at the way the level of like improvement from this Virtus Pro to the last 8 months, it's huge. But I'd say, like, obviously Neo and Taz are like 5 or 10 times better than they were. Pasha is a little bit better. Like, I think actually maybe a bit. I think he's better, but I think he's been consistently great for this Virtus Pro team for a long period of time. Bialy is still Bialy, I guess. Like he was a bit more consistent here, but basically he's on and off sometimes. So basically, in terms of individual players, you had 4 of the 5 Virtus Pro players showing up, and even like Snacks, like I said earlier, he had some impact rounds, so he wasn't like a complete dead weight for them. And these impact rounds were in critical moments. I don't know why. It just coincided that way. But I feel like the biggest improvement has to go to their tactical side. And that's the weird thing, I guess, just because I think their tactics were pretty good throughout their terrible time in the last 6 to 7 months. But this time around, it feels like, I guess they're spacing the sequences of which they're calling the tactics, and the fact that Taz is doing well and Neo is doing well, so it makes their tactics, maybe that's just the fact that it makes their tactics look so much better, because the tactics are dependent on how well your supportive end is doing sometimes. And for like Taz, like he's breaking open sites, and for Neo, it's like cleaning up the retakes, cleaning up the post plant situation. So it's pretty it was pretty stellar stuff. And I remember, like, if you go look at the stats before the playoffs, like almost everybody was negative from Virtus Pro, which correlates, I think, to the fact that they weren't winning off of any like crazy individual plays, even though I pointed out every player except Snacks was playing better. It's more like they were playing better as a unit. I think that was, they were playing better as individuals, and then their overall unit cohesion was better overall. And I think their sequencing of T side tactics was better, and it just seems like it seems like there was a lot less internal turmoil. Like, it seems like they were more focused on winning the games, and I'm not even sure what was happening before, I guess. So I guess that's a discounted factor just because I can't say, right? So even though this was like a legendary run, they had a lot of close calls. Like the Gambit series was very close, and I think if you go to the Game 3 cash on their T side, basically, it felt like round 24 was a critical round. And for those who don't really remember the exact round, that's the one where they win the force buy by doing A execute. Because after that round, Virtus Pro have tempo control, which is basically, imagine it as chess, where they are the white pieces and they always get to go first. So basically what happened was, after they did that, the fear of another A execute was ingrained into Gambit. So they moved the guy who controlled mid into more passive positions, either towards CT spawn or truck. And then from there, Virtus Pro abused that. Like, they would fake the execute, go B, or they take the mid control, do an A split. And then by the time Gambit realized like that was a problem, it was too late. It was like match point. So like they were able to take mid control again, and then they like survived for a bit, but it was too over. Basically, Virtus Pro just grinded out the last round by with another execute after, like, I think Adren went for like an aggressive peek into Squeaky and then died from a flash, or maybe somebody flashed him in and then he died from somebody who was flashed. I think that was how it went down. So Gambit, maybe they could have won, but it wasn't their day. Game 3 of FaZe was another one where I thought it was very likely that if we rerun that FaZe go win that one, just because obviously the final round was a fucking super chaotic round that looked like it was going the way of FaZe. And if FaZe win that, I think they have enough to go to the overtime, and then after that, who knows, right? But instead, basically, Virtus Pro, particularly Taz, Bialy, and Neo, went fucking nuts here. Where basically Taz and Neo were getting a bunch of entry kills and opening up sites, and then Neo was cleaning up everything. Like, Neo was really fucking good. So those individual plays really saved them on Inferno for FaZe. And then, like, I think Cold Zero points out in his interview after the entire event that FaZe basically played it wrong, but it's not necessarily their fault, just because they didn't really realize, maybe they didn't have as much information as Cold Zero did, because Cold Zero got to see the games from both throughout the tournament, whereas like this for FaZe, I'm not sure if they got to see the Inferno Gambit game, and even then, like, the Inferno Gambit game it didn't really like show that much of Virtus Pro, I guess. So basically, Virtus Pro, they survive FaZe, or they beat FaZe, go to G2, and I have to say, the G2 series, I'd say the economy problem like basically whacked G2 again. So it's an ongoing problem with the team. I will say I think my favorite round in that entire series was round 24 on Inferno, where Virtus Pro is on a 4 spot, and then they do this fucking crazy tactical round where they throw the A executes, they sneak Snacks into the pit as a lurker, and he's just hiding in the smoke the entire time. The rest of the team goes up Arch, and it looks like it's going to be a B wrap or like a B hit from there. But then like Snacks comes out of the smoke, kills 2 people, and then they go to A and then win the entire thing, and that like breaks the economy of G2. So it was a pretty fucking crazy round. I think G2 could have won if they had better economy management, but it's like G2's G2, whatever, right? I mean, you can't. I don't really know if they believe in economy management at this point. Like maybe they really think Malmo was like a one-off or something. So Virtus Pro versus SK. This was a great grand finals. It's among the best finals you've ever seen, I think, and it shows a lot from both teams. But when they go into this finals, SK is obviously with a stand-in with Bolts, so they don't have much practice. This is very similar to the time Fallen bringing Phelps, and then they got to the Vegas finals against Virtus Pro there, and then the time before that at Faceit Stage 3 with FNX, where they got into the finals against Fnatic. Except this time they win, right? And game 1, game 2, game 1 is basically, I think, Virtus Pro just figuring out that SK don't really have a set execute. So their entire defense is based off of first contesting mid control on CT side, so that like the threat of like early contests might slow down SK from taking fast mid control like they did against everybody else throughout the tournament on Mirage. And then later on they basically stretch them out, and then they stretch them out and like in the mid, so they could basically do a containment idea and pick them apart from there. That's the entire strategy. It works out fairly well for them. Game 2, like I said, Coldzera and SK basically figure out like the weakness of the Inferno CD side, which was Bialy's over rotation to B, and then they abused that, won that. Game 3 was Trade, and this was interesting. Just because I think basically this showed like the weakness of having a stand-in, just because Train is a tactical map. So it's pretty clear that there was no way they had time to practice their T-side setups. So they had to rely on individual skill, and famously, like Fur was really bad, and he's the point man for that entire team on T-side. So it was really terrible for SK on the T-side. But they switch it, and then I have to say, this SK CT side is very similar to back in the day with FNX, and the setup is such. Here's the setup. Basically, they have Bolts, and they put him into the same position he was on Immortals, which is solo site Anchor B, and he has like a bunch of really good setups with Fur, who can play connector or play pop dog, and then Taco takes up the FNX role. So basically, Taco's like there, facilitating Fallen, holding passive angles, making sure he can feel safe and getting those aggressive picks. And then Coldzera obviously is still holds at Ivy, and like the entire thing was really smooth, and Fur basically ruined everything for Virtus Pro on the CT side. So it was a pretty interesting match, even though I don't usually like CT side domination from CSGO games, but it feels like we're going to see something special from SK on Train going into the future. That's the impression I got when I watched that game, because their CT side, it feels like they can win that 13-2 or 12-3, and then once they improve their T side, I feel like it'll be pretty unstoppable. Well, that's my guess. And then on the other hand, Cash wasn't really nearly as good for SK as it was in the past, and I guess if I had to guess, I'd probably say this will be on the lower end of the map pool, whereas with Phelps, it was obviously on the higher end of their map pool. Virtus Pro was kind of like a Virtus Plow in this one, just like really running their T side strats and like just running over SK. I mean, it's pretty hard with a new team. It's I guess like basically they switched it so that Cold and Taco work together on that map, I believe. So it made it very hard for them to work together to hold that back. So we'll have to see. The verdict's still out on how good SK will be on that one. And the game 5 was obviously a legendary game. I think Coldzera actually had the best analysis of everybody just because he gave so much. You should definitely find that HLTV interview about Coldzera explaining the finals. He gives a lot of insight that you rarely see from any pro player about his thoughts. It's very analytical, very surprisingly eloquent, I guess. Just because it's pretty clear he remembers the entire thing very well. And basically he points out that because Boltz is such a passive player, he basically just like ate everybody on the long control, and then Coldzera realized, oh, they're playing kind of crazy individually on that side, just hit that side, and then that's how they end up winning the overtime. I will say Neo was fucking amazing on this map, so he was really fucking good throughout the entire tournament. If Virtus Pro had won, he'd likely have been the MVP. That's my guess. Though I think Coldzera would. I think Coldzera was so lights out. I'd have probably given it to him, but that's a different discussion. Overall, what do I think about Virtus Pro's run? I feel like this was an amazing legendary run, obviously, but there were a lot of different points where Virtus Pro could have fallen out. Obviously, they didn't. They grinded through. They played tough. They played the way you want to see Virtus Pro play, where it takes a lot from the opposing teams to take them out. But will this continue? I mean, here's the problem. All right, the reason I chose Snacks as the guy you would pick to see the resurrection of Virtus Pro is because I think Snacks can consistently do it at that high of a level. I don't think Neo can do it at that high a level. I think Taz can do it at around this level just because he's more of a supportive player, so you don't expect him to do it every game, and that's not what he did here. Not like what Neo did. And for Neo, they think this was his best tournament I've ever seen him in CSGO. It was reminiscent of like fall of last year when he was playing around like I think DreamHack Bucharest, like Epicenter levels. I think that was very, very strong, very good. But obviously we also have like that 6 to 8 month span in between that time and this time. So basically if you're getting 1 to 2 tournaments out of like 20, you're getting Neo at this level. The math doesn't add up. I don't think this Virtus Pro will stay at this level, at least not if you're depending on Neo to that level to like carry you through. But at least there's something in there, right? At least we know at the height they can reach the height of their potential still. So I guess we'll have to call off the funeral, so to speak, for Virtus Pro. I will say though that even though this was amazing, you kind of wonder how they're going to do at Star Ladder, don't you? That's because even when they were at their peak back right before E League, they lost Westseg to in third place or to another Polish team or something. So, like I said, there's still instabilities in this team. Like they still don't know what they did to get back here. Is my guess, I guess. I mean, it's so hard to read Virtus Pro. They're just such a weird team. Like I remember Moses was like, "Yeah, you can't like power rank this fucking team. Just like you don't know what they're gonna be like on the day." But I hope that they can at least show like more consistency. Like I don't want to see this like once every 9 months. Like that's just too little. So yeah, that's my read on the Virtus Pro run at Epicenter. See you next time.